Welcome everybody to this session entitled Funding the Funders, Making the Case. I'd love it if we solved this one over the next 45 minutes, but I suspect we may have a bit of a challenge on our hands. My name's Victoria Betton. I run a digital health NHS hosted organisation called Habitat, but in a previous life I did lots of arts and health stuff, so very involved in the Arts and Minds Network, setting up the Love Arts Festival in Leeds, and other things beside. So I've had a few years out of the arts and health sphere, so it's quite funny to come back and say, oh, we haven't sorted this one, and we're still rehearsing and thinking through a lot of issues around how we do make the case and how we do enable arts and creative activities to be embedded within delivery of health services, helping people stay out of health services, helping people stay well and resilient and happy in their communities. So I'm delighted to be joined by a fabulous panel. You've been doing a lot of listening today, so what we're going to do is just do a couple of minutes with each of our speakers, just sharing some thoughts and insights, and hopefully asking at least one question that helps us all think about the topic. And then we'll open it up to more of a discussion, because I know all of you will have your own experience, expertise, scars, and all the rest of it to share on this topic as well. So I guess we'll just go round in a line, if that's all right. We have to use these for the filming purposes, so when we ask questions as well and have a conversation, we'll move this microphone around. And I'll let people introduce themselves, because they'll do it much better than me.
Hello everyone, so I'm Jo Ward. I'm based in the northwest of England, but I also work in Yorkshire. I work for Museum Development Yorkshire with an annual cohort of museums. We're just about to start this year's project. I also wear a number of other hats. My boss at the STP, which has been referenced before, is the Sustainable Transformation Partnership for Cheshire Merseyside, refers to me as the friendly agent. So I work inside of the NHS and look to find clinicians who get it in terms of creative health agendas. We bring them together and we plot. We also develop resources to help people where they may not have clusters of clinicians that have already found each other. So there are a number of publications that you might find useful for influencing some of the NHS commissioners in your locality. How long? Just a few minutes? Okay, so there is a publication that was launched at the King's Fund last year, and I've got this all in a PowerPoint, so don't worry about detailed notes. Something called a Cultural Manifesto for Wellbeing, which has 4 domains. It was signed off by Halton CCG, who have 100% social prescribing across all their GP practices. And basically it has 4 domains, and it looks at how we need to work across those domains. So it's looking at sport, culture, it's looking at social value, etc. And it's looking at the connections, and it gives some recommendations. So the idea was a bit of a poke at some of the CDGs to start thinking creatively that we're not solving a lot of problems with traditional public health methodologies, and it's about time we start thinking and doing things differently. It's signed off at a very senior level in terms of support from Duncan Selby, Public Health England, and it's also got directors who are willing to put their necks above the parapet, as it were, in terms of a CCG. From there, we were able to then develop work around early years and Best Start. So some of the work that we've done has been very strategic in that Best Start is a big issue for most areas, particularly where health inequalities are high. So we were able to then secure funding to take the Cultural Manifesto forward in terms of a practical scoping exercise to look at what happens to women's and children's services and how we can demedicalise the birth process, but also what can we do using arts and cultural assets to actually deal with perinatal mental health, and also in terms of the word deficit for the most deprived children. That activity is moving forward next week. There's a symposium. So the symposium is about spreading the word further, and as a result of that, there's a Concordat that's being developed, which we'll share again, because we'd love it to happen in Leeds too. And we've already spoken to Ian earlier to ask if we can infiltrate with his support. That Concordat takes forward some of the commitments within health where We are making inroads, but people are really cautious, and we're not quite feeling that we're getting where we want to get. So it's a kind of layered approach to a public health commitment across the STP, and it actually states a universal commitment to all women and children to provide a creative health agenda and the first universal free social prescription for all mums and babies. The devil will be in the detail. The symposium's next week on the 5th. It's in Liverpool, and there are places available if you want to come and meet some amazing speakers and academics who are pushing some of the boundaries, and some of the senior decision makers, system leaders as they describe them in the NHS. They will be around in abundance. But this is the key element that I wanted to mention as well, that again, in terms of, it's about how do you help other people in other areas to try and push things forward. So with the Concordat, we have the Institute of Health Visitors nationally signing up to it. So your health visitors will be committed to a creative health agenda, and quite significantly in terms of resource, nationally we have 15 academic health and science networks. Don't worry if you've not come across them, but they're quite important. They manage budgets, project budgets of around 63 million nationally. And there are, I say, in terms of Yorkshire, you have a Yorkshire and Humber Academic Health and Science Network. The good news is the North West Academic Health and Science Network has signed up, and their chair is the chair of all the academic health and science networks. So the kind of Trojan horses that basically they're signing up to a creative health agenda and social prescribing, that should mean it's very easy for you to have those conversations in Yorkshire, and we'll hopefully be collaborating further with the university to try and push those conversations. I'm not going to say anything else, but what I've put together is a PowerPoint with hotspots, so information about what academic health and science networks are. The 100,000 Genome Programme, you've got one on your doorstep. They've just given Eureka significant funding to explore what genetic mapping is by working with children. They're also interested in working with the most deprived groups. Tell me when to shut up, I'll shut up whenever. So it's all in the PowerPoint, and there are 3 challenges to you at the end of the PowerPoint, which are things that you might want to do that would help push forward the agenda by having lots more double agents within NHS ranks.
Thank you very much for that, Jo. You said some words there that I absolutely loved. Plotting and infiltrating. So really what you're talking about is about those sort of the relationships, being able to influence, and having someone that can hold that role sort of from the inside out, but also connect the outside in, which sounds like the role that you're playing. And then the importance of symbols like a concordat, something that sort of can represent a shared commitment, and then having that leadership. And I think lastly, something about knowing the landscape, so knowing what you can tap into. So academic health science networks are absolutely pivotal for diffusing innovation in the NHS. That's their role. So they're a really important asset to be connected to in your region. So some really good insights there, Jo. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Faye, who's going to share a few thoughts with us now.
Thank you. So, hi everyone, I'm Faye Robinson. I'm a Research Development Manager here at the University of Leeds. And my role is a dual role, really. The first part faces into our academic community here. So, picking up on some of the themes that have been raised already, actually, around connecting. So, I work with researchers in the medical and life sciences and the arts and humanities, and I help them connect with other researchers and with funders who might support their research ideas. And through our team, we do a lot of bid support, and we help with project management for large-scale funding bids, and we help people find competitive schemes to fund their research and articulate their ideas for those funders and for those audiences. So the other half of my role involves looking out to those funding agencies. The primary organisations I work with are the UK Research Councils and major research charities like the Wellcome Trust, the Medical Research Council and the AHRC. But we also have relationships with organisations like the AHSNs, our Northern Health Science Alliance, and other bodies that are routes into other kinds of competitive funding for research and innovation.
Thank you very much. So some similar themes there, but you're sort of doing that scouting, horizon scanning, that sort of expert sort of support, and then forging those relationships with things like the Academic Health Science Network so that you can help researchers and artists connect into them. So there's a strong theme here around navigation, I think. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Sylvie, who you've already met earlier today.
So hello, as Victoria's mentioned, I'm Sylvie Fourcin, Director of Artlink West Yorkshire, so hopefully you saw me presenting earlier. I mean, we're in a very different position in that we're not linking people up with funding, we're a delivery organisation. So we're one of the many who are struggling continually to find funding, to survive, and to continually look at legacy when we do get funding. So I suppose what I wanted to talk about initially was breaking the myth about philanthropic funding, because that's one of the things that's always bandied about, and you're always told, oh, you can go and get private funding, you know, as a small charity. It's absolutely rubbish. And there's also this myth that in America, all the small charities get money through private giving. It's rubbish, because you know, what was wonderful about my Winston Churchill Fellowship last year was that I got to talk to organisations that were similar to ourselves. So Elders Share the Arts, who are the organisation that was similar to ours, have naturally now folded because the National Endowment for the Arts was pulled by President Trump, I think about a year ago, and they were completely dependent on government funding. The Creative Centre that I visited, who work with people with long-term conditions such as cancer, they were funded actually through private donations from a consultant who really supported their work within a private hospital setting. The MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, they're purely funded privately, but that's because they're a massive organisation, they're world-renowned. And so I just think, just to put it in context really, we are totally dependent on lottery-type funding, trusts and foundations, and more than anything, government funding. And I just think the work that we do would not be possible without public funding, as in the government absolutely, if it believes in the work that we do, which clearly it does because of the arts and health movement, the development, the redevelopment of it, it's suddenly on the map again. If they do not put the money where their mouths are, none of this work is possible. I mean, we have been completely saved by our big lottery funding that I talked about. So I was very fortunate to get 3-year funding through Reaching Communities initially, and then to get 3 additional years of funding. Hayley, my project manager, and I have been in meetings over the last few months to look at legacy. So we've gone to our partners and we've said, look at the amazing work. They love what we do. They've read our reports. They've read our anecdotal evidence. They're always shaking their heads. So Progress Housing, who are one of our main partners, they support the Lilac group that Milena talked about this morning. We went to meet them yesterday and they're basically saying, no, we don't have the money. And it's just heartbreaking. That is just to continue one small group. They said to us, oh, well, you can go to our community part. That'll only give you funding for 1 year. And so I suppose, yeah, the message really is that it's still a struggle, and actually into the future, sadly, I can see it being more of a struggle. And we are surviving purely because of the national portfolio funding that we receive through Arts Council England. I mean, I feel very fortunate that we've continued to get that funding. It's highly competitive. And we're also surviving because Big Lottery, who are not an arts funder, actually recognise the impact of arts engagement on the disadvantaged communities we work with. And we do have a small amount of funding through NHS, through our tendered posts. So Tom, who's not in this meeting, but Arts and Minds, who Victoria was basically instigated initially many, many years ago. He is hosted in Artlink on a tendered post, which is funded through the NHS. But anyway, so that's my point really as a small charity.
So Sylvie gave us a bit of a reality check about how tough this is, and I just wrote the word shoestring when you were speaking. So from my memory back from Arts and Minds days, it was always about a little bit of money here and doing something on a shoestring there, and we were very fortunate actually to make the case and get that permanently funded post. But that was after the Arts Council did some seed funding, and that was really powerful actually in getting the board of directors to sign up, and because it was seen as valuable and valid by another organisation, that helped make the case internally. So on that note, I will segue over to Kath from the Arts Council.
Thank you. So I'm Catherine Mitchell. I'm a Senior Relationship Manager at the Arts Council, and I'm based in the Leeds office. I'm also I have a lead role, just have had it for the last year, around arts and health across the north. There's a small team of project champions that work nationally, and that we're looking to see how we can respond to the obvious shift at the moment, or the acceleration really in terms of visibility profile of arts and health, because obviously it has been around as an agenda for a very long time, for decades, but there seems to be some traction that we're getting with the all-party parliamentary group. So we have this internal group. I'm assuming, actually I'm not going to assume you all know what the Arts Council is. So we're the National Development and Funding Agency for the Arts in England, and we have two types of funding from the Treasury, from government, what's called our grant in aid, but we're also one of the lottery distributors. So we run what used to be called Grants for the Arts, is now called Project Grants with National Lottery funding. And I'll come on to that in a moment. Now, last year, we invested, let me just check, 18.5 million nationally on projects that were specifically described as arts and health. I don't know whether you think that sounds a lot or not very much. I think it doesn't sound very much, but it's still a large chunk of money. But I think it's probably not capturing projects or organisations that deliver health-related activity but don't necessarily define it explicitly like that. It's actually quite hard for us to interrogate it historically. I think we'll be able to do it better with the way we are collecting data now. So there's a baseline that we do fund arts and health projects. I think historically, or even currently, there's still a little bit of concern that we're not really interested in projects that deliver on health or other kinds of social outcomes. So I think in 2006 or 2007, we wrote an arts, and this is before I joined Arts Council, I joined in 2010, a manifesto or a framework for arts and health. And we haven't done that since. When we moved into our new 10-year strategy, which runs 2010 to 20, there isn't arts and health isn't a specific goal, and I do know that caused quite a lot of concern that we didn't really care. And I know that crops up quite a lot in the advice that our relationship managers give. But I do want to emphasise that we do. It is an area that we recognise happens quite naturally across all arts projects. If you go and buy an opera ticket, you're maintaining your well-being. It's just that it's not described like that. So just to go back to the lottery funding, which is our open access programme, that's probably the way in which most people can raise funds or match funds towards an arts and health project. Would any of you like to hazard a guess what the biggest reason is for failure of an arts and health project? Evidencing results of the project. Any particular types of evidence? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Shall I just say? Yes. Telling us, sorry? No, we don't ask for a business plan. No, we don't ask for a business plan. It's telling us what the artistic outcomes are. It's that simple, and I think sometimes people misunderstand that for us not liking the project because it's health related. And I think it goes back to every single funding pot has a particular set of criteria, and you have to answer those criteria and you answer the prompts. So if you don't tell us what the artistic idea is and that you choose to use your word count up on how it's going to improve confidence, or it's going to reduce isolation or reduce doctor's visits, those are really valid things to tell us, but don't do it at the expense of what the artistic idea is. And that really is as simple as that. I can speak more about that, but I think I should stop.
Okay, so some good advice there from Kath about how to deliver your Arts Council funded project and deliver against the requirements. Okay, so we've had some provocation, some inputs from a variety of different perspectives. Just to get us going, what I'd like to invite you to do is to turn to the person next to you, and I'm just going to give you 2 minutes, and either discuss a wicked problem or a hot tip that you would like to share with regard to this topic of making the case. So I'm just going to hand over to you guys for 2 minutes to have a quick conversation, and then we'll come back as a group. Okay, shall we come back together as a main group? So despite the fact that it's boiling hot and it's late in the afternoon, you did all seem to get engaged in a conversation. So it would be lovely to hear from some of you about either a hot tip or a wicked problem, or indeed a question that you'd like to ask the panel. And we have a microphone over there that's going to... Oh, right at the back, bad luck.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to say your name and where you're from as well, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Sydney Thornbury. I'm the CEO at the Art House in Wakefield. I've been there since December, but I've lived here for 27 years, even though I don't sound like it. And I guess because I'm so old and that I'm a little concerned that we're not learning from some legacies here. Okay. Like, if you are old enough to remember the All Our Futures report and the whole thing about creativity in education and arts in education, you know, that was a sort of potentially a boon period for arts organizations who delivered outreach and engagement projects. And it never quite got there, mostly because education is so politicized and there were changes of governments and changes of policy, but also because the funding mechanisms were never really solidified, and we couldn't actually prove quantitatively impact, right? The thing that interested me when I started working with ASOP and Tim Yoss, which is a big arts and health organization in London, was the fascination about the fact that we actually could have some quantitative evidence out of these things. If you're working with, Alzheimer's patients, there can be, or Alzheimer's might not be the best. If you're working with like the Dance for Parkinson's program that ENB does, you know, there are actual medical things. If you're working with people who are depressed, you can actually measure serotonin levels. So this seemed fantastic to me. Not to diss the important stuff, which is the narrative of what we do and the impact, but I'm just saying we all take that for granted, don't we? I thought the whole social prescribing thing was going to be about, there was a service contract, you know, there was a service that arts organizations could provide for health organizations, for the NHS. And a service contract is very different from a government grant. Just as a side, the entire National Endowment for the Arts in America is less than what they spend on their military band uniforms. Just love that statistic. Sorry. And so I'm concerned, first of all, that we're all still talking about grants and like, you know, kind of scrambling for money, when in fact these are earned income streams that we were talking about developing initially. So where is that happening? With, you know, where are we with that, with social prescribing, and that actually being an earned income stream for organizations, and the process of having, you know, a registry of arts organizations that work with their local NHS providers.
Okay. So is everybody familiar with social prescribing? Would it be helpful to describe it? just very briefly, well, my take on social prescribing anyway, which is contested actually, the whole notion of social prescribing. It's still very medicalised language, but the idea that you're prescribed a social, cultural or participatory activity rather than medication. Definitely in Leeds, there have been 3 social prescribing services are now being recommissioned into one. But as I understand it, and I could be wrong, the funding is to connect people to activities, but not to fund those activities. So if you have a deficit of funded community activities, there's nowhere to link them to. So I might be wrong. That would be my take on where things are at. You mentioned Phil. Oh, Phil, could you talk a little bit about social prescribing, where you are and how you're exploiting it, and then we'll come to Joe to talk about it from your context.
Yeah, I don't know if people heard Rob speak this morning, but I'm from Creative Minds. We're a charity hosted by Swift, which is Rob's the chief exec. I mean, he mentioned 250,000 being given to us, and we work directly. We've got over 130 partners now across Calderdale, Kirklees, Wakefield, and Barnsley, and we kind of provide that. We enable Arts Council funding to be matched with that. So that 250,000, or we'll not quibble over numbers, but we doubled that by matching it with Arts Council funding, lottery funding. So it's still got an element of kind of grant funding within it, but it is money direct from the NHS that's been used to, and in terms of bids, it makes it more attractive, because if we've got a pathway to vulnerable people, which we have, again, being hosted, I suppose that's another thing. We're the Trojan horse in that organisation, bringing everybody in to work in that way, and we're changing. We had a round of funding just recently, and one of our doctors sent a 2-page document saying what he thought about the project and how it could be better. And so that's a real breakthrough, because I think medics need to get on board with this. The culture, I would say, we've been going for 7 years. I'd say 25% of the organisation knows what we are, knows what we do. We kind of fit into social prescribing, but I wouldn't, I mean, it can be a bit of a flavour of the month. I'm reluctant to kind of sometimes, and policy drivers for a lot of this don't work anyway. I think this is about a social movement, about culture change, about doing things differently. And Rob, you know, having Rob with the kind of mindset he's got, we're there, and we'll carry on being supported, but you need more Robs at chief exec level. Does that?
And this is the challenge, that it relies on discretionary commitment. Yeah.
With all due respect, it's capped at 4,900 quid. I mean, we've applied for it, so it's not like I'm saying, you know, it's not helpful, but it's not the same as a service level agreement. I thought that patients were supposed to have personal budgets. I thought that this was going to tap into that. Okay. That, you know, you were going to basically be able to provide a service. And we have got to get away from this complete begging bowl mentality.
Yeah.
So I'm just aware that you're not going to be picked up because you're not microphoned.
Next step, and Claire from Calderdale Council, Rob mentioned, we're prototyping some work in Calderdale that will be commissioners commissioning this. We'll prototype some work, and then we'll get commissioners to pay for it. So it would be a direct payment from commissioners.
If we get the mic over here, but then I'll just...
So in the handout that we'll be able to send out, there is a copy of the draft social prescribing plan, which is a national plan from NHS England, and there are 3 tiers. One is about increasing connector schemes, so you're spot on in the sense that's where the money's going, that's where the NHS feels most comfortable. So that's about having people that are knowledgeable about what they describe as community assets, and basically signposting people to provision. There's a focus on building the evidence base, and there's also basically how you get leaders on board within the new STP structures. So although Rob said that it wasn't about major changes in the NHS, there is an element that place-based activity does potentially come with some risks. So some areas may not be as keen on social prescribing as others, So the focus at the moment is very much around messages. So from the STP I work with, it's about money following the patient, because what I've seen happening in some areas is where we have a connect scheme, they absorb most of the money, and then they piggyback on existing arts projects and activities and saturate them with referrals, and that basically puts them out of business. So we've heard at the highest level that there's an understanding that money does have to follow patients, and there will be some kind of formula, because public health have a methodology that you have to do something for so many weeks before you break a behaviour, you get a behaviour change. I can't give you any of the detail because it's all been kept really quiet, but there is a ministerial announcement next week on the 5th of July. We are assuming that the commitment to social prescribing will come in that announcement. And we're also assuming that, I don't know if you remember, there was some big pots of money in November time from the Wellbeing Fund, which was basically looking at social prescribing pilots over a longitudinal period. They told everyone that didn't get the money and never announced who's got it. Apparently, the people who've got it know about it, but nobody else does, other than the minister. So that will be another announcement. And again, we don't know whether they're connect schemes, they're hybrid schemes, so they might be delivering as well, or they may well be offering grants and funding. I don't know, but we will know, I think, on the 5th of July, so it's next Thursday.
You heard it here first. Right, over here.
I'm not sure I can add very much to what Jo has just said. In terms of Calderdale, we're really just starting to work in a hopefully more structured way with Phil and his colleagues who are supporting this area of practice for artists, because a part of this is supporting practice for artists, whilst the other critical point, of course, is working with patients. And Rob did talk about that quite clearly this morning, and about the kind of impacts that have been evidenced so far, but which need further evidence. I think Jo has just been really helpful about sort of how the picture is looking. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but I think, sorry? Sydney, I think I just, when I was listening to you, you were reflecting back much of how I feel, which is that I find it quite hard to get certainty in this area of work. The NHS does seem to constantly reorganise or reprioritise or rename a scheme you thought you understood. I'm sorry to sound so critical, but I find it very hard to map that and to be able therefore to pass on an awful lot of intelligence. So we are working on this in Calderdale. I think I hope we'll take a kind of a longer view than is normal in this sector. Part of my role in Calderdale is one of professional development around arts organisations, and the feedback I constantly get from them, from those who are working in this sector, is like Sylvie, but perhaps not even as fortunate as you at the moment, that really excellent projects are funded, but for too short a period of time, and they can't. And just as you get your teeth into it and you're really starting to get results, the money runs out. So we need to address. I can only say I think we all need to address these things and put pressure on. Yeah. Sorry, it wasn't more helpful.
I just reinforce that actually at the NHS we often run on one-year cycles. So someone finds a bit of end-of-year money, throws it as a project sort of January, February time, then don't have capacity. I'm sounding really negative now as well. We're getting ourselves in a spiral of misery. But then they don't get sustained. So there is something about being much more strategic and planful, and that sort of embedding that you describe, rather than sort of that tactics are fine up to a point, but they only take you so far. Anyway, Kath wants to.
Yeah, I just thought, yes, the risk of being a little bit negative, continuing to be negative. I worked on the Arts Council's Cultural Commissioning Programme, which was looking at ways in which to support arts organisations and artists to get commission ready, but not just in health settings, in across different public services. And I went to an event last year reviewing the project that the National Council for Voluntary Organisations ran for us, and there were no surprises really, and I think it's playing out here. Given the wider context and of austerity, there is a large amount of churn. So I guess I'm saying this to reassure you that what we're finding actually is normal, and we just have to deal with it. There's high turnover in staff, which really interrupts the relationship building, and everything hinges on that, which is why it makes it quite difficult to have a blanket approach. I think there are many different kinds of business models or different ways in which to deliver arts and health. So it might be in a commissioned framework, but it might be one-off projects. It might be through a large organisation delivering a strand of projects and developing a relationship. And you couldn't have anticipated it might have worked out like that. But I think all of those are kind of valid. But I guess it's just to reassure, to say, unfortunately, it is hard. And understanding the different languages and the different ways, we have to just join together and make sure that we're communicating amongst ourselves to give ourselves as much as an advantage as we possibly can. I think Joe wants to come back.
And I think learning from Joe and others who seem to be doing this really well, and hopefully infecting others with what you've achieved.
I just wanted to add that I think it's about thinking about health in the round. So if you are inside the NHS, social prescribing sits in personalised care, which actually is where the personalised budgets sit as well. And there's a whole focus on self-care. And there's a realisation that if you're going to equip the public to take more responsibility for that self-management, that they need to be confident, etc., etc. So there's a range of different ins that might not necessarily come under that social prescribing, but also the focus has been very much on primary care. So that's the kind of, up to the GP level, really. How do we reduce the number of GP appointments? Because since 2005 to 2015, apparently, we went from an average of 3 appointments a year to 6. And actually, we're not that much sicker, but actually people are going in with a wider range of social problems, which the doctors can't fix. So there's some element around social prescribing there, which actually misses the point, really, about what arts bring. So some of the conversations we've been having with Health Education England, who's the workforce development arm of the NHS, is what can the arts do to help you to retain your workforce? So there are some national conversations ongoing in terms of how do you put compassion and care back in by taking some of the pressure off in terms of the hamster wheel that many of the nurses and doctors feel that they're on, but also how do we stop burnout? There's some really impressive amounts of money been transferring hands. So I worked on House of Memories 2 years ago, and NHS money is big bucks in comparison with what we're used to seeing in terms of culture. That there was a massive project to fund basically House of Memories team to develop a video of what they were delivering in the museum, because of rotas within hospitals, the clinicians can't get out. So they were able to take the resource to them, and that's opened up international funding. So if you speak to Carol Rogers at National Museums Liverpool, she hates flying, she's all over the world, and they're bringing money internationally. So it's about pincer movements, but also thinking more holistically about what you can offer health. And certainly in terms of the clinicians I speak to, apparently, and I've never seen the statistics, more clinicians play musical instruments than any other sector. So there's a real ripeness of the ground and fertility for conversations. It's just often we don't know where to find them. So within the pack that we've put together and will be sent round, there's a useful animation from the King's Fund on basically what the NHS looks like post-restructure. It's really short, it's quite witty, and it was actually developed for clinicians who don't understand what the hell's going on in the NHS. So if you think you're confused, don't be surprised. But part of the issue is also my bugbear is I get funded by national organisations to do orientation work, stakeholder work, and then they merge or they fold, and that information gets lost. We need to get better at sharing that information, so I will go back to the National Alliance for Museums. They funded me for 9 months to do a roadshow. We had a massive workshop in Yorkshire, and I know that money transferred hands, shall we say, as a result of those network conversations between Academic Health and Science Network, Health Education England, etc., etc. But there's an element of people wanting to keep it quiet because they don't want other people to actually mine that area. But I think as institutions, then we should make some commitment, and that can all go into the new Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance resource pot. So that, I think, is a really positive step. There's one place to put that information.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I'd like to finish on an upbeat note. So some hot tips. Who's got some hot tips to share from how they've made the case well and managed to engage the right people? And we're sitting here until someone gives me one, by the way. Just to motivate you to share one. Great, thank you.
So I'm coming from the other angle from most of you, being in a dental school, doing randomised controlled trials that was sort of not today. But what we've actually done is we think it's really important. Dental health is a disease of social inequality. And we're very bad at getting our messages out. So we do these great randomised trials that cost £2 million. And what we were interested in was taking our messages out to the community. So I worked with Theatre Debate, who are a charity down in London, and they do big theatre projects and debate and have a very high level output. And I said to Nigel, well, I've only got about 20k, so can we have like an uncut version of a play and that we send out to the schools and tell the kids in these really deprived areas about oral health? And I took Nigel out of his comfort zone, but as a scientist, we were also thinking about, when you were talking about impact and how that's important, how do we measure it? I took him further out of his zone by saying that I wanted to embed some oral health messages in the play so as I could actually evaluate whether the kids had learnt anything. And that's not how he normally works, but he went along with it. And it's a co-production, so the kids at the school are helping us, patients are helping us, the undergraduates, postgraduates, very, very inclusive projects, cast of thousands involved. And the sixth formers at the school helped us do the questionnaires that they were going to give out to the pupils. Actually quite complicated questionnaires, but I thought it was not my place to change it because they were driving it. So we did the classic after the performance, you know, do you remember what dental trauma is? Do you know whether you're supposed to put what you're supposed to do with a tooth if it gets knocked out? So do you put it in water or do you put it in milk? So do you put it in water? Anyone? Do you put it in milk? Okay. So these were things that they didn't know, and you're supposed to put it in milk. And you take it along, and the hospital, if you get there quick enough, can put your tooth back in. Dental trauma happens all the time in sports fields. But the key thing was we wanted to go back a year later and see whether the kids had remembered anything. Because they came back and they said, oh, we loved having the play, and you know, they remembered everything. And my sociology friend said, go back a year later. But of course, we've got a fixed audience, so we can do that. Then my RCT hat comes on, and we've got this natural experiment that some of the kids had seen the play and some of them hadn't. So we're actually able to do the analysis that the funders want to be able to show this huge statistical significance that those that had seen the play a year later all remembered, well, 69% of them remembered compared to 3% in the control group, that actually they were meant to put the tooth in milk. Now, my dental public health colleagues go, blimey, we never get that type of impact when we do research. So that's a great output in a scientific, hard, quantitative data out. The great thing for the social enterprise side of things is the sixth formers then came to us with the head teacher and said, we really enjoyed working with you to co-produce the play. Can we do some dental research with you? Completely unpredicted. Yeah, anyone wants to do dental research, you welcome with open arms. And we were able then to set up these enrichment programs with the sixth formers doing their extended qualification, EPQs, extended project qualifications on dentistry in this very multi-ethnic, it's 98% Muslim girls at the schools and really high ethnicity. We're in the second year of that now. Struggling, it's all unfunded. We're trying to get it going on goodwill at the dental school. And those girls have now gone out. We've trained them this year as oral health educators. So a cohort of 7 of them have come forward. I can't really cope with much more than that. And they're being trained by our undergraduates in how to give gentle oral hygiene. They're going out with our team to the primary schools. And the primary schools are going, please come and tell us our kids are having days off school because they've got oral health problems. And they're doing the touchy-feely, you know, have you enjoyed us coming in, and the qualitative aspects of how it's been to take part. But interesting, we're also got the graduate students here doing a research project on it, saying what's been the oral health behaviour? Are they brushing their teeth differently? And what the schools are saying to us was, we've loved what you've done, but can you come back now and teach the parents what to do with the children? Okay. So we're going to start to do that, and it's a spin-off. But my thing was that a repeating pattern today has been about evaluation. And I think you have to plan it from the beginning. And that's what we did with the hard, you know, embedding these messages about, you know, tooth trauma and how to brush your teeth and sports drinks. Those were in the play and debated afterwards, and we can track where the most impact is. But it's the unexpected consequences that I think are actually really important. And then my university outreach department said, I don't want that touchy-feely stuff, Sue. But if you can get permission that at the school you've been to, we can track whether they're engaging to come to university and which university they're going to. We'd be really interested in that. I said, well, that's really easy, I said, because one of the girls that we've had on this programme has applied for dental school. First person at the school in 20 years to ever apply for dentistry. So lots and lots of outputs. And I suppose what I'm saying is it's outputs for different audiences, and think about how wide you have to go. Is it an arts council output? I wouldn't know how to describe the artistic things. I'll think about that. But lots of science outputs there, and very different ones for different audiences. Okay.
That's a lovely story, and thank you for sharing that. And yeah, outputs for different audiences, knowing what you're trying to achieve, being clear about it, and then evaluating, knowing how to generate the evidence. Okay, so just by way of finishing, I'm going to invite each of our panel members to share one of their own hot tips or tactics. Mine is, which is a very specific one, when I had to make the case for the Arts and Minds network post to be permanently funded, I had to go to the NHS Trust Board of Directors and make the case. And I took all the evidence and so on and so forth. But actually the thing that made the difference was I took a theatre practitioner with me, and they were absolutely petrified, which was quite joyous. And I did a participatory exercise with them, with the theatre practitioner, and that was what blew them away, actually. And it was something about immersion and experiencing the thing that we were talking about in the abstract that made the difference. So just a little tactic, a little bit high risk, but on that occasion it did pay off.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the work with cultural commissioning, often it was commissioners seeing a piece of work in action or taking part in it themselves, actually, that did the convincing rather than any other kind of evidence. So a couple of tips from me. One is to sign up to the culture, if you're not already, sign up to the membership of the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance, which is the new sector support organisation formed out of the merger of the National Alliance for the Arts and then the museum one, which Joe has been talking about working for. And my second one is Arts Council is in the middle of consulting for various phases of its consultation for its next 10-year strategy. In the autumn, there will be a arts sector consultation. Well, they call it sector consultation. It could be any sector, who knows? So I'd urge you to contribute to it and think about what you want us to do and how we might want to do that in terms of arts and health.
I suppose as an organisation that isn't networked in terms of offering funding, I think the main advice I would give is not to give up with your idea. I mean, I think that our major project developed over many, many years, and it was built up through pilot project, it was built up through networks, it was built up through seed funding. And I think that so often there is a danger of compromising what you do. And I don't think that that is the right thing to do. I think that it's very important that if you're passionate about what you're doing and you really believe in what you're doing, there is a way. There is always a way of developing it. And I think that that's the message that I would give. There is funding out there. And I actually disagree with the issue about government and trust funding. We do need that funding. I don't feel that Artlink could do the work that we do without additional support from public sector funding.
Okay, a couple of hints and tips from me then. I think Sue's example was very useful, actually, because there are some funders who have a strong reputation for funding arts health work. The Wellcome Trust is one of these. But actually, lots of funders now want to step across boundaries. They want to support new and different paradigms of interaction. And I know of arts health programs that are funded by the NIHR. I know of projects that are funded by the research councils, arts researchers who hold MRC grants, and medical researchers who hold AHRC grants. So my first tip is about being confident in stepping outside of your comfort zone. And one of the things that I particularly enjoy about working in a university is working with people who are passionate about what they do. And one of the things that they're good at is talking about why that's important to people from the same area. They can persuade their peers. But what's increasingly important is having the skill to articulate why it's important to people who aren't in your field. I think that's right for any sort of grant activity. And often, I think health is actually a particularly difficult space to do that, because people will say this service area, clinical area, or disease area affects this number of people and they're suffering, and we can make a difference. And they think that's answering the importance question, and they fail to connect that then to the work that they're doing. So there may be 100 ways of answering that challenge. So why is your way of answering the challenge important? So they're my primary hints and tips, I would say.
At the back of the presentation that you'll get, there are 4 asks really in taking action. So number 1 was join your Yorkshire and Humber social prescribing network, and within that there is a link to David Cowan, who's your link person. Then the other one that I would suggest is that I'll send the final version of the Concordat, which the Academic Health and Science Network for the North West are signing, to the Cultural Institute for dissemination. And then I would suggest you go hot foot to the Academic Health and Science Network for Yorkshire and Humber to have a look at their innovation portal and start making an ask. So they've got accelerator funding, which is about innovation and creativity. And basically, the Concordat opens that up from pharmaceutical and digital to anything that's creative. And last but not least, have a look at the 100,000 Genome public engagement activity. Talked about personalised care being sort of basically really high on the agenda, and actually something that social prescribing is subsumed in. This is kind of another variant of personalised care with DNA mapping, but it's well, this is a personal opinion, it's got nothing to do with the NHS England who fund genome, that actually we risk really over-medicalising activity, and that we need to try and stop that before it starts. So if we can influence them on the ground, particularly their public engagement people, then perhaps we can really have a relentless pursuit of wellness and well-being and stop focusing on illness.
Fabulous way to end. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for coming to this session. Thank you very much to the panel members. The agenda says drinks reception, which I'm quite excited about. So shall we say thank you in the accustomed manner and go and have a drink?